RPN is not responsible for the views, actions, opinions, or statements of its guests or advertisers. The information contained in this program is not to be construed as medical or legal advice. An appearance on this show is not to be considered an endorsement, but as always, we encourage you to do your own research. Enjoy the show. Simone's already here. Good evening, everyone. How is everyone doing tonight? Welcome once again to Saturday Night Livestream. Tonight my guest is Professor Ayran von Dreger, lifelong researcher of government and media sanctioned hoaxes, and so much more. Tonight we're going to be talking about the evolution of control across the globe, the evolution of the cabal, where it's been, how we got here, and how we're working to take them down. I hope everyone is having a lovely evening. Please do me a favor, don't forget to like and share this broadcast. Help us break through the algorithm. Simone says hello. All right, gang. Please, everyone, do sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, and we'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor. The CV-19 crisis is causing aftershocks all throughout the world economy. Everything is at risk now, especially the food supply. Yes, the government can print bailout money, but they can't print food. Food takes time and the production follows a tight schedule. But CV-19 interfered with that schedule. And now there are gaps in the supply chain that will soon show up as food shortages at your local grocery store. Are you prepared? What if you can't buy any food for a couple of weeks? Well, don't panic. Just go to preparewithredpill78.com right now, and you can save $100 off a 4-week food supply of delicious, nutritious food from my Patriot Supply. They're the top-rated company I personally use and trust for my emergency food. You'll breathe easy when you receive your 4-week kit. It gives you enough meals to get you through the coming food shortage nightmare, and the food tastes like home cooking too. So don't delay. Go to All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming.
I'm very good. Thank you very much. You're speaking to me. I'm here in Cairns, on the northeastern coast of Australia. It's semi-tropical here, so I'm in wonderful weather right now. Exactly. We've got white sandy beaches, absolutely beautiful. Put Cairns on your map or on your list to come and visit up here. And just north of us here is the Daintree, which is a world designated rainforest, very special area here in Australia.
Muted. How am I muted? Okay. God, sorry, guys. All right. Well, welcome, Professor Ayran von Dreger, to the show. I don't know how that happened. Okay. Don't worry, guys. I'm not going to mute. I'm not going to mute. If I do mute, it's an accident. So Simone was just on my shoulders. She jumped off, and it's her fault. I'm going to put it on her. So yes, we're welcoming Professor Ayran von Dreger to the show. He said he's in Australia. You probably heard that part. I was asking if there's white sandy beaches and jungles and palm trees and stuff. Always wanted to go to Australia. Never had the opportunity. We were talking before the show, and I was telling you that I'm a father. My daughter is nearly an adult. She's essentially legally an adult, but not quite yet. And so, yeah, I guess I've always figured that I would be able to travel once she got to that point and she could go out on her own. So, and I'm feeling much better about the idea of her being an adult in today's world than I have at any other time. I mentioned in the introduction that you've been a lifelong researcher of the cabal, this world order they've been trying to put upon us. Tell the audience who you are. What's your history?
Okay, I'll give you a bit of my background. I'm born in Europe of Viennese parents, and they took the family, which is myself and 4 kids altogether, in Canada in 1950. And the reason for that is that my father was in both world wars. The first one as a 16-year-old in charge of a battery of cannons. They were in the Alps shooting down against the Italians, where we actually have cousins. And my father said, fortunately, in the First World War, if you were in the Alps at that time, all you had to do is duck behind a rock. And when cannonballs came shooting up against you, you would save yourself that way. And then he was in the Second World War as a result of Mr. Hitler having taken over Austria. And then he said, I'm fed up with Europe, and he took the family to Canada. So that's where I learned my English, as you can probably tell. There, I went to the University of Toronto, and then eventually I got to be an academic. And I'm not really that terribly much an academic. I'll tell you why in a while. I took degrees in history and philosophy, and then in political economy. Went to the University of Prince Edward Island, which you guys in the states, southeast of the eastern states, you ought to know where that is. That's that little province which lies like a bunch of red mud in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And I taught there at the university for a number of years. And then I escaped myself to New Zealand. And I escaped because I was finding out more and more about what is now known, in various names as the cabal or the Illuminati or the globalists or you name it, whatever. I tend to just call them the big bad boys.
That works.
They're mostly boys. They're mostly boys. There are some females in there as well. Now, I haven't been a lifelong student of that. I started hearing about it as a result of the Bilderberg Group, which you'll all recognize, because they named themselves the Bilderberg Group because they gathered at that particular mansion in Holland sometime in the late 1950s. And then in the 1960s came the Trilateral Commission, and that sort of was the beginning of my learning about becoming aware of the fact that in effect there was something going on here among the elites of the world who were gathering not just for their own benefit and for having a good time, but they were actually colluding against the population of the world. That's when it occurred to me that became clear to me that is what was happening. And teaching political science and eventually becoming chairperson of the Department of Political Studies. It was called Political Science. I renamed it Political Studies while I was chairman there. They've renamed it back to Political Science.
It's not much of a science, though, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In Oxford, I think in England, they still call it the Department of Politics. Anyway, I became aware of the fact that these people were gathering and colluding against the public interest. And it's very interesting that, in studying what's called capitalism, and I'll talk about capitalism a bit later on, but in studying about capitalism, we usually get, looking at Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations. And that's usually used by people who are, dyed-in-the-wool capitalists, because they say, well, Adam Smith said that in effect, the best thing to do is to let the free hand of the market run things, because that is the best way to proceed. Well, what most people don't know is that Adam Smith also wrote that the most dangerous thing in a society is when you get merchants that get together, and it looks like they're getting together for a bit of a party or having a good time, maybe a barbecue or something. But in fact, what Adam Smith pointed out is that when merchants get together, watch out, because what they will do in the back rooms is that they will collude against the public interest. So the very person that's usually touted as being the big advocate of capitalism, Adam Smith, actually warned that if you don't watch out what's going on, then these people will collude. That was way back when, in the 18th century. Well, in the 20th century, this is what the Bilderbergers and eventually the Trilateral Commission, in effect, I saw that this is what these people were doing. Now, just to give you one more little thing about my background, and that is when I left the university after my undergraduate degree, I went to work for the Ford Motor Company. The Ford Motor Company at that time had its international headquarters in Oakville, Ontario. And that included all the Ford manufacturers and distributors all over the world, except for Detroit. Detroit was separate. And then from one day to the next, I think it was 1968, all of a sudden, Ford Detroit took over all of Ford International. It just from one day to the next. And my boss's boss, who was Carl, I've forgotten his last name. He was the president of Ford International. He was pensioned off with, a golden handshake and whatever.
Made redundant.
Made redundant from one day to the next. Detroit took over. So having worked for Ford International for a couple of years, they had hired me as a trainee to become one of the chief bosses. And interestingly enough, unlike you, Zach, I didn't have a degree in business. My degrees were in history and philosophy and public policy, public administration, political economy. So at that time, Ford was still hiring people, taking into account what the English used to call the greats. And the greats were mathematics, philosophy, history, geography. That's the background I had. So they were going to try to train me in order to become one of the bosses of the Ford Motor Company. And I found out directly from personal experience, this is the 1960s, about how the multinational works. And in that regard, let me just put in a little footnote here because it's important for your listeners. When I was teaching at the University of Prince Edward Island, one of the films which I showed the students at that time was called The Controlling Interest. And that was put together by California Newsreel. California Newsreel, as far as I know, still exists. And so you'll be able to get this film called The Controlling Interest, The Role and Function of the Multinational Corporation. And the reason that I'm mentioning that is that film, they had people that they sent out. And now we're looking at the 1970s. So this is way early, way before the internet or anything like that, way before video cameras. They went with films and they interviewed people who were the heads or the deputy heads of big corporations and big banks. And those people at that time quite honestly answered questions that they were asked. And if you see that film, you'll see these people say, yes, of course. The bottom line for us is to make money. And we are interested in expanding all over the world as much as possible.
So no filter, no PR department, just honesty.
Wow. Listen, and what they said at that time, I just really love that film because it demonstrates it shows what these people are actually doing. They said, look, we're going to go into Africa. Why? Because those people are so willing to work for, 5 cents an hour, 10 cents an hour. And not only that, but they're very good with their hands. And these are executives. And in that film, you'll see that their salary is then flashed above their heads. So this is a CEO of a company who at that time was making $750,000 or $1 million a year. Now, at that time in the 1960s and 70s, that's like what? 20 or 40 million today.
Right.
So at that time, we'll go back again to the fact that the Bilderbergs were meeting. We couldn't find out what they were doing at that time. Since then, people have gone in and, they've penetrated the cordon sanitaire that these people put around themselves. And the same thing with the Trilateral Commission. Now, with the Trilateral Commission, what I want to point out is something really interesting. Mika Brzezinski has been very much in the news recently. Well, her dear old father, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was an advisor of to American presidents, from the 1960s on. He was one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission. Mm-hmm. So very interesting that these, what I often call bloodlines. I can now watch television and see Mika and say, well, yes, I knew your father, because I wasn't directly in contact with him particularly, but I was in contact with other people who were pretty high up in some of these organizations. As a chairman of a department, while I was still there, you see, they gave me access to all sorts of stuff until they found out that, in effect, I couldn't be trusted. So I'm a little bit like you, Zach. I said, and so, well, eventually I then left the university, because even though I was chairman of my department, this is the beginning of political correctness in the 1970s. So you're looking at a creature of the 1960s here. I'm a member of the Woodstock generation, make love, not war. Yeah. Yes. And here's another little footnote. Marianne Williamson, who you must undoubtedly have heard of, because she actually for a while was going to run for president, which is a really silly thing for Marianne to do. She's a very intelligent, she's an absolutely lovely person. I consider her one of the main sort of spiritual leaders actually in the world. But Marianne Wilson said in the 1960s, yes, we were all into make love, not war. The problem was that we were all stoned at the time. And this brings us out to the present. At the present time, we have to learn to make love and not war, and not come up to it by being stoned, but by being sober.
Absolutely.
And sober means not somber in the sense of being, deadly serious. We can still, have some fun and enjoy ourselves, but at the same time, look at the thing really seriously. So what's happened in my time, since I was born until now, is that this whole process has actually now matured to the extreme situation in which we are now. I've been forecasting, or I was forecasting, the extreme situation since, let me put a particular time point on it, and that is the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Mm-hmm. I can still get almost teary when I think of that, because, my goodness, that was a key point in which what we call now the cabal, because it was obviously an inside job. There were some half a dozen people actually who were shooting at the president. And it appears that only two of them actually managed successful shots. The first one in his throat, and the second one in his head, which literally blew off the back of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's head at that time. But that was a major turning point. And I recognized at that time, mind you, nothing like I do now. Those were the beginning inklings of recognizing, my goodness, there is a cabal, and it's in the United States. And the United States was and still is the center of the free world. And that is what's happening where you are, Zach, and where your American listeners are. That is the center of the place where this whole drama is centered and unfolding. So what happens here in Australia, what happens in Europe, and for that matter in the rest of the world, that will get the results of what's happening where you are. So we are now in a very, very severe situation. All this stuff has come to a head, and we are facing a struggle. We'll stay with the mundane level at the present time, the practical, everyday, mundane level. We are facing a struggle between good and evil. At the spiritual level, at the esoteric level, that is where it's actually being fought out. And we are experiencing it here on an everyday level. I am experiencing every day at a personal level, and at times I have real difficulty sleeping at night.
All right.
Anyway, your turn.
Yeah, please hold that thought. Let me just say a couple of quick thank yous to the audience. Survival Strategic says, hey, Red Pill, will you be doing an episode on indigo children anytime soon? I just learned about their existence, and it seems like a coincidence that the subject is coming to light in our days. So this is something I've thought about, and I've definitely had people suggest it to me. but I've never found anything more than just anecdotal evidence of it. I mean, people have told me that I'm an indigo child, but I mean, I don't know that I am. So Cassandra Morris says, cool. Thank you, Cassandra. Cheryl Smiles, thank you for that as well. Thumbs up. Baby Yoda says, try not to smile. That's impossible, Baby Yoda. Shout out to Angels Fly 17. Bet she is smiling. Inside joke. Love to all. Love to Simone and the fur coat. Yeah, I'm wearing a triple animal fur coat right now. Q Wife MAGA Life says, every time the professor giggles, I giggle. Yeah, we could, somebody, if you drink, you could make a drinking game out of every time that Aaron giggles. Baby Yoda says, for JoJo K, I don't know what is going on. I do understand she would appreciate good trouts and a caring nature in thoughts focused to help love this family. Okay, so that was for one of my mods. God's Daughter says, given an honor and gratitude for my chainsaw chick friend on the East Coast. We both love Red Pill 78. And then God's Daughter has also joined as a member. So big shout out to the chainsaw chick, and then also big shout out to God's Daughter as well. Also want to say thank you to the mods. I see Methods is out there. What's up, buddy? Thank you, everybody, for keeping the chat comfy. Aaron, when you initially realized what was going on, I mean, what was your initial instinct? You know, as somebody in education, did you try to talk to students about this? I mean, what did you try to talk to people and other people in academia, your friends, your family, or was it something that you held on to and then slowly brought out?
No, I certainly talked to, the only family I had was my immediate family, which was my then wife and my two daughters. Who I then took to New Zealand. We can talk about that later. Mm-hmm. But basically at the university, I was very spontaneous. And I thought at the time, you know, here I am hired as a university professor. And at that time, particularly, it was also understood that one would get tenure. And I got tenure at the university. So I started talking to my fellow academics in the departments of philosophy, sociology, history, my own department. And I said, look, there's some very serious stuff happening here, and we need to take cognizance of what's going on. And I invited them to have a look at films like The Controlling Interest that I was showing my students. And I found out, see, this is the beginning of this, what's now called political correctness, where they didn't want me to do that. Mm-hmm. They didn't want me to show those. They didn't want me to ask those questions. And so, you know, for a while, I bulldozed on and said, this is our job. This is why we actually put into positions. This is like a high court judge. Nobody can fire us. You know, we're paid by the society in order to give them correct information. Oh, no, they didn't want me to do that. My students, yes, not all of them. Some of them, here's a little footnote. The business faculty at the University of Prince Edward Island, it was known that if you're going to get a degree in business like you have, Zach, then you better not take a course from Professor von Dreger. It is not advisable for you to take a course from Professor von Dreger if you're going to take a degree in business. One professor at one time actually scribbled a note like that to one of his students, and that student brought it to me, and I brought it up with the Senate of the university. Wow. And you know, there was a huge kerfuffle, but they stonewalled it. Oh yeah, terrible, shouldn't be like that. So two things happened as a result of that, which is my own history. The first one is that my colleagues elected me chairman of the department. That's how you got to be chairman.
Quite honorable.
You get elected by the colleagues in your department say, yeah, look, you carry on and do this for a while. Good. The administration has the power of giving you advancements in terms of your what you're called, right? So I was a lecturer when I was hired. They never promoted me either to assistant or associate professor, let alone full professor. They wouldn't do that. So I would go to meetings of chairmen of departments of political science at Canadian universities. You know, we'd meet once a year, and they'd all come. I think this is very symbolic. You know, but what is it that Q says? Their symbols. By their symbols, we shall find out who they are, and they will lose their what they're trying to do. Anyway, here I am going to meetings of chairmen in which I raise these kinds of issues. these chairmen were all coming in suits and ties and leather briefcases with gold initials on them. And I said, look, you are all working for multinational corporations, in particular in the social sciences. You're not telling people what's actually going on. I came in jeans. And, I'm dressed right now, very simply. Well, they didn't like me either. And the university didn't like me. And even though I was chairman of my department, I found the pressures were so great. I'm not the most courageous person in the world. So I literally escaped. I got out of there. I said, I'm leaving. And they said, you're leaving? Why are you leaving? This was in the 1980s. And there was some kind of an economic downturn. And they said, look, you've got a guaranteed job with a guaranteed salary. Why would you want to go? And I said, because there's something wrong here in the system. And where are you going to? New Zealand? Oh, my good Lord. I went to New Zealand to try to get as far away from the industrial modern world as I could. It didn't help.
Yeah, I was going to say. And, thinking about the advent of political correctness, it's interesting that you say that you felt it creeping in the 80s. Because I didn't feel it myself. I mean, of course, I'm only in my early 40s, but I didn't notice anything like that until the 90s. I mean, there was a certain decorum and respect that you granted people, but the idea of political correctness didn't really occur until the 90s. And I'm wondering if you feel that Canada was ahead of its time in terms of the advent of political correctness, because it seems that Canadians today, and certainly not anyone who watches my show, but a number of Canadians are perhaps under a greater degree of political correctness today than we find ourselves in the United States.
Well, let me say two things about that. I'm saying the beginning of political correctness, but that term was not invented until much later.
Okay.
So, but in order to make that more precise, what I should say is what I certainly noticed, and from what I've said, is that there was a beginning of a push not to actually simply say that, tell the truth, but in effect to start hedging on stuff, to start hedging. It's like hedge funds,
right?
To start, being somewhat careful not in order to protect the public interest, but careful in terms of protecting what we now call the cabal. The beginning of a situation where, particularly in the social sciences and particularly in political studies that I was involved in, is to say, look, don't get into the areas where you start investigating too deeply what the people who are in charge of what's going on in the world, who they really are and what they're really doing. Stick with more general affairs, more local affairs. Stick with history when you're talking about political science. Well, look at, I don't know, who the kings of England were, or who the prime ministers are, or presidents of the United States. Talk about that kind of level, but don't do the deep digging, which is now obviously finally got to the point of where you got all these digital soldiers, like in your audience, who are actually digging about what's going on. So what I'm talking about is that was the beginning of the time where, don't go into the area of where you're digging more deeply.
Now, do you think?
Yes, Canadian. The other thing about Canadians, Canadians are absolutely lovely people. New Zealanders are even more lovely. The difficulty with being so lovely is that you stay moderate. There was one of my colleagues way back, oh my God, 50 years ago, I forgot his name, who wrote a book about Canadians. And I think the book started with something like the phrase, Canadians above all have got to be moderate, never be extreme about anything. So if you're terribly moderate about everything, you don't call anything out. You don't say what's terribly right or what's terribly wrong, what you particularly like or what is not okay at all. You stay very moderate. And this being moderate is one of the characteristics that actually feeds political correctness. You don't want to get offside anybody. You want to do it right for everybody. And that's the root of that. So what's being called for now, I'm going to go into all sorts of sidelines here, because it occurs to me, what's being called for now, what is necessary, is the full emergence of the masculine. This political correctness, as you all undoubtedly know, has tremendously put down the genuine masculine.
Yes.
And that is integrity. My family's background are aristocrats. Now, aristocrats in the original meaning comes from the Greek word aristoi. The aristoi are the people with virtue. They are the people with integrity. And if they are somewhat more intelligent or more capable than the other people, then their job, their responsibility is to look after the community in which they live. So the genuine meaning, that the genuine aristocrats would be the people who say, yes, I'm born with a bit more intelligence or capacity to have a wider view of what's going on. My job is to use that in favor of the community. Rather than
using it in favor of enriching yourself.
Only yourself. In process. Enriching the community. If we look at what wealth is meant to be, what riches are, I can get biblical on this. I'm not particularly Christian. I'm not particularly Buddhist. I'm not particularly Jain or anything else. But all those traditional religions have core values in them. And the core values are to tell the truth, to stand in your integrity, and to use the capacities that you have for the benefit of the community. Now, I'm going to give you another footnote. This is going to be full of footnotes. And that is in the English tradition. And the English tradition is the one that came up with a liberal tradition in the best and most effective and strongest way. The British Parliament was the first parliament in the Western world in the 12th century or 13th century. Magna Carta was when? 1215 or something like that. Magna Carta is when the barons, like the fathers of the American Republic, the barons who all had beards, they looked like hippies, got together and said, no, we're going to face the king and say, the king doesn't have absolute power over life and death over everybody. We have a right to have a say. And they had that revolution, which resulted in the Magna Carta. And the liberal tradition in England, you can use the Magna Carta as a beginning for that. Okay? And what happened after that is you had any number of revolutions. Some of them were bloody, some of them were bloodless revolutions, like about 1689, Charles II. And there's a process there in actual fact, in actual practical undertaking, which is the parliament and the country generally. And then you have the philosophers who are writing about the liberal tradition, about liberty, about the importance of the unique individual. And then in the 19th century, you get John Stuart Mill and you get his father, James Mill, and they write books and articles on liberty, on the liberation of women, things like that. And then in my experience, in my knowledge of the situation, the last genuine liberal philosopher was L.T. Hobhouse. And the reason that I mention him, he is at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. And the reason I mention him is that he comes up with a key crucial phrase, and that is, the community is the master of the free man. Now that, you can do a whole university course on that. If it's a free person, then how can a free person have a master? Well, that's the freedom of the individual exists in the context of the community, the society, the very world, the three-dimensional world in which we live. That is the context in which freedom can be intelligently, safely, productively be exercised. If you go out of that, then you go from liberty into a word which is now no longer even known in English by most people, and that is the word license. When I asked my students, and this was 40 years ago, I can ask you guys, what does the word license mean to you? And they'll come up with driver's license or fishing license. And I said, no, in a more philosophical sense, what does license mean? The old English word license meant an excess of liberty, using liberty in a destructive kind of way. Okay? So L.T. Hobhouse said the community is the master of the free man. Now, to bring that up to date, you get people like Mark Passio. Have you interviewed Mark Passio yet?
I haven't interviewed Mark Passio, but he's somebody that I do subscribe to on YouTube, and he's a very interesting guy. Yeah,
okay.
That would be a good interview.
Absolutely. Get a hold of Mark Passio. he was brought up in a family which were Satanists, I guess. So they did all sorts of black rituals, and he got out of that. Listen to Mark Pazio. Now, mind you, he gets mad as hell. But I like watching him because I think it's important for us to get mad as hell. Mad as hell, that brings me back. What was the name of that film in the 1970s? Network. If you haven't seen Network, go get it or find it somewhere and watch Network, where this anchor, this news anchor, he's going to be fired. So just before he gets fired, he has this rave. And he said, you think that by watching television, you're actually watching what's going on you're hearing what's going on in the news? You think we're telling you what's actually happening? This is all show. And not only is it show, when the show isn't the way that the big boys want it, then in effect, we tell you lies. Absolutely. So don't listen to us. Anyway, that's the movie Network.
Very relevant today. 1 second. Let me just say, because Varick Echo has put the same super chat out twice. What do you know about Joseph Gregory Hallett, the new king? I don't know anything about Joseph Gregory Hallett. It's something that he's just popped up. Many people have sent me videos about it. And he's asking if anyone else in the chat has any info on Joseph Gregory Hallett. Personally, I think the monarchy is going to go the way of the dodo pretty soon. I saw it was going crazy, but waiting for nonce to tear it apart. Yeah, I think that if there is any legitimacy to Joseph Gregory Hallett's claims, it's going to be borne out. But personally, I haven't had time to look into it at all yet. But I'm sorry, continue.
Mr. I can tell you a couple of things about dear Mr. Hallett. He's got these documents which in effect prove that he is in the correct line of descendants, and therefore he ought to be king. That actually doesn't work either.
Good luck enforcing it.
If you look, no, it isn't just that. It's the fact that the English monarchical line was broken at the time of Edward IV. Edward IV actually was conceived not by the king at the time. The king at the time, Edward III, was in France. So the queen had some kind of a affair with a local, not a consort. I think he was a gardener or an archer or something like that. If you want to see a documentary about that, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, actually they did a series on the monarchy. I think his name was Robinson, who was the chap that organized and scripted that, and he presented that. And so if you find that particular episode where Robinson actually explores, he goes back and traces the line of Edward the Third and then Edward IV, who is not a legitimate, and he has found at the time, this is a number of years ago, that if you trace the correct biological line of the English monarchy, then the English monarch who should be on the throne is here in Australia. He is what was the name of their family? Starts with H. I've forgotten it now. Anyway, as a young man, I think as a 17-year-old, his family still are earls or dukes or whatever, and they had castles in England, but they had to sell them because there wasn't enough money in the family, and one of their grandfathers lost all their money on horse racing bets. But he emigrated to Australia, and he's a lovely, lovely white-haired individual, and he lives here in Australia. So if you want to look up at that episode, Hallett, unfortunately...
Somebody's saying Hastings in the chat.
Hastings, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
So regardless of whatever paperwork they have, the Windsors are not going to relinquish the throne for anyone. I mean, I would imagine that if Mr. Hallett or Mr. Hastings showed up on the doorstep at Windsor Castle and said, hey, guess what, guys? It's time for me to take over as rightful king and heir to the British throne, they would have him beheaded, or if not, just lock him up in the Tower of London.
Right. As a matter of fact, there's something else that comes up with that series, and that is, all the stuff we've been told, God knows how much of it is actually not correct. And that is that the various beheadings, particularly, the Henry VIII and the people that he beheaded, or the women that he beheaded, it may very well be that those people were not actually beheaded, that there were doubles that took their place.
Oh,
And
okay.
that those people were spirited away. If you do some digging, and fortunately now there are so many people digging, that all sorts of people who presumably were killed, like who was the dictator of Iraq? What was the name?
Saddam Hussein?
Saddam Hussein. That even Saddam Hussein was actually not hung; that it was a double,
He and his sons as well. Apparently, there was a film about Uday Hussein. He had a body double, and he often had him doing all of his royal duties, and then Uday was out with, like, ladies of the evening and going to nightclubs and stuff.
Yes, and there's some documentary that I saw which points out that there is some village or town or small city in Russia where apparently some of those people are sent to as a haven for them to be in, and they live very, very luxurious lives over there. So that the people that we are told that were executed, some of these very top people actually weren't. I mean, like Napoleon. Why didn't they execute Napoleon? They sent him to first some island, then he came back, and then they sent him to Elba, and eventually he might have been poisoned because he might have been just too dangerous.
So do you think this is a courtesy, and by decapitating or beheading the doubles, it keeps them looking strong in the terms of the eyes of history, and they just allow them to go live someplace else, or are they actually escaping?
No, they're actually escaping. I think it's an inside. It's like many of these inside jobs and inside situations, that there is an agreement that whatever happens, we will look after you. So if you lose, then we will still look after you. I mean, we now know that in effect the major wars, including the two world wars, were actually financed by the cabal. Both sides were financed.
Right.
So since both sides were financed, there is a kind of it's a really inappropriate term to use for it, but gentleman's agreement. A gentleman's agreement among not only thieves, but among murderers, who say to one another, whatever happens, if you lose, then we will take you to some place, we will put you to some place where you still be able to continue quite a luxurious life, that there's an agreement between these people.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
let me just say there was another one. Patrick Drummer says, "Pray for the vets in the fallen. Decoration Day." Yeah, it's a Memorial Day, and I've never heard of Decoration Day. I do apologize. I don't know what Decoration Day is. But so now that we're kind of in a situation where it looks like these people are on their last legs. I mean, I would imagine that the Club of Rome and the Bilderberg Group and any of these secret groups are probably going to exist in one form or another behind the scenes, even if everyone who's currently a part is taken away and put in Guantanamo Bay or something similar to that. There's still going to be something like a vestige that hangs around. Are you excited about the state of the world? I mean, does it feel any different to you when you look around and people have awakened and people are talking about it openly now?
Well, I hope you're correct. I mean, I certainly agree with you in terms that I hope that the quote unquote good guys will win this struggle. And, there are people, and some of them, like the Q group, seem to be quite certain that nothing can stop this, that in effect the quote unquote good guys will win. I hope that it's true. On an everyday basis, I'm still looking at the fight that is going on. I mean, this real war that we are in. I've been calling it World War III for quite a while now. I did an interview on an FM radio in New Zealand when I was over there last October. And that's the first time where on the net I've actually said, look, this is World War III. People who look to Edgar Casey or Nostradamus say, well, these people have forecast a war. That we are in the war. This is a war of information, disinformation, misinformation, lies, and the chaos. What the cabal, what the big boys are doing as much as possible is to create as much chaos as possible, so that a lot of people that I talk to, I'm sure this will be true of people that you talk to as well, who say, we don't know. How can we tell what's actually going on? It's very difficult.
It is.
Because not only in the mainstream media, but also on the alternative side, you got so many disinformation agents, trolls or not, or so on, that are being paid by the cabal in order to create chaos. And behind the chaos, to create fear and insecurity.
Well, one of the effects of those people being paid to sow dissent is that people stop trusting each other. They start looking at anyone that is, perhaps speaking not necessarily exactly in line with whatever their worldview is, and they see that and they immediately will call them out as a disinformation agent or a shill. It's very unfortunate, and it's a successful way for them to do that.
Yes, it has nothing to do. This is one of the things that I used to tell my students. When people tell you something is unfortunate, be very careful, because mostly it doesn't have anything to do with fortune. It has to do with people's decisions or lack of decisions, people's actions or lack of actions. Let me refer to Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt is an American lady. She was a Jewish American lady who wrote a book on totalitarianism. And it used to be the standard basic work on totalitarianism. And she identified the key element of totalitarianism is to induce in the population institutionalized insecurity. If you make people insecure, if the institutions, and that is the media, the universities, the very people who are meant to educate people, in effect tell lies, create confusion, and the population gets, as you say, fearful because they are insecure. And then they start to talk about their neighbors and what they're doing and what they're not doing. So when they're looking around, they're actually, saying something about other people, or else they simply stay at home and cower, which is what has happened with this pandemic that has been planted on us. This pandemic that has been planted on us. I used to think that at some point or other, somehow or other, martial law would have to be declared so that people would be in their homes and you get curfews happen. And I was wondering how and when that was going to happen. Well, we've had the effect of martial law, and that is not by the government, the president of the United States, or the president, the Prime Minister of Australia saying, I'm commanding everybody to stay home, lock yourself down. No, they're saying it. We're doing this for your own good. Because of the situation that we are in, this is the thing, that you need to do for your, and as a result, we've got people locking themselves away, and social distancing. All this stuff is really absolutely terrible. In terms of looking at how far the population can be pushed, how much they are willing to take orders from the state. I mean, we are really here in a fascist situation in the classical meaning of the term, and that is the corporations, the big money interests, combined with the government people who are in charge. They have the authority, they have the power to enforce what they want to do, and that's a classical fascist situation.
Absolutely.
Get people locked up.
Hold that thought, Aaron. Q-Wife, Maga Life, thank you again. She said, every time the professor giggles, I giggle. Dark Brain says, POTUS, a blow to her head, body found under his desk, left Congress suddenly, big topic of discussion in Florida, and he's a nut job with bad ratings. Keep digging, use forensic geniuses. President Donald Trump pointing directly at Joe Scarborough in relation to his former intern, Lori Klausutis, who was found mysteriously with a blow to her head in his office on a morning that he was supposed to have an appointment with someone, and then he said he was out of town. I really do feel that President Trump shining the laser pointer on this is going to come up in a big way. I think Joe Scarborough is going to be in prison before too long. Denise says, prior to 1917, the British royal family did not have a surname, but were members of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Queen Elizabeth's Gotha. Queen Elizabeth's father, King George VI, was born in 1895 as a member of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And Patriot Drummer says Decoration Day is Memorial Day. Decorate vets' graves with flags. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Just no one has ever said Decoration Day. So back to your point about the fascist situation that we're in right now. You're absolutely right. They've used fear and instilled in us this idea that the world is going to end. And people were willing to give it up in the interest of their well-being. But I also think that now, as a result of the information that's coming out, and from many sources at this point, also just firsthand, anecdotally, I don't know a single person who's gotten sick. I know that apparently people who I know, who also know people, have fallen ill. But you look at the number of cases of deceased people, and it actually seems less than an average year of seasonal illness. So I think that because of that realization, because of people coming to that on their own, you can't always tell people something. You got to show them. People have been shown now all of the lies. I don't think they're going to be able to do this again. I think that people are going to stand up and they're going to go to work. They're going to get back to business.
I completely agree.
Okay.
That's what's it's the Great Awakening has been forced through this kind of situation, and so this kind of extreme at some point or other had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we're talking about extremes, let's go back again to how this thing originated, or the most recent phase of it originated,
mm-hmm.
and then what some of the key elements of that are. So I said earlier, the assassination of President Kennedy, and then, of course, the assassination of his brother, the assassination of Martin Luther King, all inside jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at that time, we started waking up to the fact, doing a bit more digging, that not only had the Vietnam War, that was later, sorry, not only had the Second World War started because of what was the attack on Hawaii?
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, that the American administration knew well that Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked a week before.
Mm-hmm.
So they allowed at that time the stuff to happen. So that was not a false flag operation. That was sort of a beginning of what then came to be false flags. The assassination of the president at that time, that was a kind of a false flag, in that it was attributed to Oswald, whereas in effect it was the cabal that had done it. And then you get the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, and then you get all sorts of other false flags, the blowing up or attempted destruction of that federal building somewhere not too far from where you live.
Yes, that was in the Murrah building in.
Okay.
I'm drawing a blank on the location, but
okay.
It just happened to be a building where the records regarding the Whitewater situation were being held in the basement. But yes, yeah.
Exactly, and you have Timothy Pkwy,
mm-hmm.
Blamed for that and eventually executed, and he may very well have been involved, but there were much bigger and higher powers that were behind that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come to the key thing that had happened, and that is in the year 2001, the attacks that occurred at that point. I call that the biggest elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm. Oklahoma City. Thank you, guys.
Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then those attacks in New York, and the attacks in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Those were that was the biggest false flag. That was the most planned and most carefully executed job in order to create the situation in which we are now. For me, that's the key defining moment.
Well, that put us into a state of extended war. I mean, we immediately went into a state of emergency and a state of war with those actions, and then we've never left. And so I think many things that have happened ever since then have just been a continued extension of it. Yeah.
Correct. So in relation to that, I just want to mention two authors. Your viewers may know of them, or if they don't, then they ought to. And the two authors are Christopher Bullen. I get in touch with people like that myself, just to have a personal connection with them. Christopher Bullen wrote a book, and the title of that was Solving, and then after the word solving comes the numeral 9, and then comes the numeral 11, and the subtitle of that book was the deception that changed the world.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Bullen was a newspaperman. I think he was working for Reuters or some big agency like that. And he actually was very close to New York on that particular date. He had already done all sorts of journalistic investigations and research and what was going on in the Middle East. And he continued to do that. Now, in that book that I've just mentioned, Solving the numeral 9 and then the numeral 11, he gives you the historical background, which goes back at least 20 or 25 years, because that is when that attack was actually planned. And Christopher gives you the people involved, the organizations, the particular techniques that they used, and what happened historically. The whole background is given to you by Christopher Bullen. And the person who gives you, the only person that I know who actually gives you an account of exactly what happened on that particular Tuesday in September of the year 2001 is a lady by the name of Rebecca Roth. Mm-hmm. Rebecca is spelled with a K-A-H at the end, and Roth is R-O-T-H. It's like the beginning of the name Rothschild.
It is.
Rebecca Roth. Rebecca Roth started out by writing a first novel, and she wrote them as novels. And the reason that, well, you can probably imagine for yourselves why she wrote them as novels. The first one was called Methodical Illusion. The second was Methodical Deception. The third one is Methodical Conclusion. And the fourth one is, what is the fourth one? Methodical Exposure. Rebecca was a flight attendant for several American airlines, including she also worked for the military for a while. So she really has a huge background in terms of the airplanes, how they fly, what the procedures are, what the emergency procedures are, and so on.
Tremendous insight. Yeah, I reached out to her. I reached out to her just in the last 48 hours. So hopefully I'll hear back from her.
Well, she will be an excellent person. She's a bit of a prima donna. She is. I mean, I got into it. I've got some conversations with dear Rebecca. She is highly intelligent. She is completely committed. I'm amazed in some ways that she is still alive. Maybe because so far she's written these things as novels. Now, they're written as novels, and therefore, in Methodical Illusion, the first one that she wrote, it starts out by saying, like on the frontispiece of the book, like any novel you'll read, it says anything in this book which resembles any person living or dead is purely coincidental, blah, blah. Sure. And then you look at the preface, you just turn the page and look at the preface, and she says, I'm writing this book, and I'm writing it as a novel, but everything that I'm telling you here about what happened on that Tuesday, the 11th of September, 2011, is absolutely true. I'm giving you the fact. This is what happened. Mm-hmm. And so she starts out, and interestingly enough, she starts out on that day at something like 6 o'clock in the morning, way before any of the airplanes had actually been taken off. There was a recording that was uploaded somewhere, I think it's to the FAA, to the Federal Aviation Administration, which says, we are in terrible danger here, we are being hijacked. And the hijacking is being done by terrorists. And that, I'm not citing it exactly, you have to read her book in order to find out what the exact wording is, but that recording was uploaded into a computer at 6 o'clock on that morning.
So many hours before it actually took place.
Many hours before anything actually happened. Now, as Q says, these people are stupid. Now, they're not totally stupid. They're very bright, and they're very intelligent, but they make some really stupid mistakes. Well, and one of the mistakes that they made is that on that day, all the recordings that were made, you would know this, Zach. You're a bit of a computer expert. I'm not. Mm-hmm. But in effect, if you record anything on a computer, there's a timestamp that is put on it. And that timestamp stays there. Mm-hmm. And then the NSA or whoever it is that keeps track of everything, literally, that's been said and conversed about and uploaded, they have that. What Rebecca got was, through the Freedom of Information Act, she received 1 terabyte, a whole terabyte of information. which is all the various radar people and the conversations and the data that was printed by the Federal Aviation Administration. So I'll let you go and have a look at those books. Now, mind you, when you look up Rebecca Roth, you'll find her attacked by any number of trolls and disinformation agents. Oh, she's just, trying to sell you beauty products or something. Oh, she's totally fake. She's going by a fake name. Now, as you very well know by now, the more that somebody is attacked, the greater the likelihood that there's actually something there.
Absolutely.
So Rebecca is now, a lot of us have been saying, please, Rebecca, are you willing to write a nonfiction account? And literally, as we are speaking right now today, she is doing that. Rebecca is putting pen to paper, or not pen to paper. She's writing on her laptop. She's sort of gone underground, or what do they say? Gone black or something?
So someone in the chat just said that Rebecca was exposed as a fraud 2 years ago. As I don't know, and it's funny that you were just saying that at the exact same time. I don't know Rebecca or her story. I've only have anecdotal information as it regards to her, but. It certainly seems to be a fascinating story, and of course, to your point, people are unmercifully attacked when they are putting out good information. But I have to do a couple of quick thank yous, and then I'm opening the phone up so that people can call in. I know people want to speak to you. Let's see. Justin wants to know what you think about Angela Merkel being Adolf's daughter and a Rothschild. Do you think that that's something that holds any water?
Look, I'm still a political scientist, or I'm still an academic. So when I say things that I know to be true, then, I want to stick with facts about which either I have personal experience or I have enough reputable people saying that I'm very confident. And on that one, I go to the side of where I'm purely speculating. I don't know.
Right.
It seems to me that there is a good possibility that that's the case, that Hitler, in effect, like any of these big people, in effect, was not, didn't shoot himself or, had somebody else shoot him, or that he was cremated and there was nothing left of him. But being one of these big people, there's a very good likelihood, but I'm guessing that, in effect, he went to either Canada first, and then South America, but that in effect he was not killed. As a matter of fact, we've got some witnesses that purport to have seen him after he was supposed to have died in a car where he was driven by some chauffeur to an airfield to take off somewhere. So if that's the case, it may very well be. I don't know.
Well, I appreciate that, Aaron. On this program, I always make a distinction between theory and speculation and things with which we have hardcore evidence. Moving on to the next one, Baby Yoda. Thank you very much, Baby Yoda. Patriot, and I could have sworn that I saw another one from Baby Yoda that I don't actually see listed here. But Baby Yoda, thank you very much for that. Justin also says, great show. Oh, there it is. Hey, buddy. Handshake and a punch in the arm to you, just being friendly. Thank you, Mr. Thods, too. Baby Yoda, I appreciate you being here. You're a real good friend of the program and myself. Patriot Drummer says, I absolutely love the wise generation. And Miss Sue says, Rebecca was the one who woke me up to those incidents in September. So, guys, I've got the meeting ID and the password on the screen. I've put the Zoom link into the chat. I've also put the password and the meeting ID into the chat. And if you are to refresh your screen, then the Zoom link and the meeting ID and the password will also be in the description of this video. I'm also going to make sure that I put the phone numbers that you can call for various places within the United States. If you're calling from outside the United States, unfortunately, you're going to have some type of international plan on your phone. I'll be there right now. So with regard to everything else, and actually somebody said something. Oh yes, Rebecca has been on SGT Report on Sean's show. And PG wants to know where I get my vape juice from. I literally just search for the brands that I like, which is that the wet. This is Juice Head that I like right here, and then I also like Wet Liquids. I just look to see who has the best price, and I can usually find it for around $12 to $15 for a 100 milliliter bottle. That's what works best for me. So With regard to where we're at today, I mean, are you tracking anything that you see taking place in the world? That perhaps secret moves behind the scenes. Anything you've noticed in the news that perhaps gives us any clues as to what's going down? I mean, we see things like the sealed indictments. We know there's over 160,000 sealed indictments. We see CEOs of various companies, resigning on a daily basis. There's people in government that's happening to. I mean, everything that I see, it shows me that we are moving closer and closer to the goal. But do you see them doing anything that perhaps we should be taking note of?
Not that I can say. I mean, obviously, this pandemic that we are under was orchestrated by them. I mean, it's amazing how in your face this stuff is, and that they had a conference just last year. Was it last October? Bill Gates and company. What did they call it?
Event 201. Yeah,
Event 201, in which they describe what's going on. You have Dr. Fauci saying some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago,
it's a guarantee that
it's a guarantee. So they do announce ahead of time what they're going to do. Now, what they're going to do next, I really don't know. I mean, obviously they have tried just about everything possible in terms of the Russian story, then the attempted impeachment, and then dear Mr. Trump, he's a racist and he's a misogynist and whatnot. So I think they're basically running out. I don't know what's next. What I would be, and this is pure speculation, what I would be concerned about, but there's nothing that we ordinary people can do, that is that an event might be something that resembles what we had in September of the year 2001. That some of the top people actually, I mean, they're obviously psychopaths. That's really clear.
Yes.
And I'm happy about the fact. When I used to say, to my faculty or to my students back now 20 or 30 years ago, look, these people are psychopaths. They all thought I was the crazy person. Now I'm happy to see that more and more people actually recognize that the very top people are actually psychopaths and sociopaths.
The top of the 1%.
So from those kind of people, one can expect the most insane, the most anti-human kind of thing possible. So all we can do is who is it? One of your colleagues, Dave, at the X22 report. I mean, it was. I really like your show, excellent show, Zach.
Thank you.
Then the X22 report, a praying medic. Really like Dave Hayes in a calm way that he talks about what's going on, and so what we can speculate is that anything is possible, and therefore be prepared. We are in a world war. At the present time, that's in the terms of chaos, and now they have brought this influenza in, and the reason that this particular influenza might have a few fewer deaths than usual is because of this whole lockdown and social distancing. If it had been allowed to continue as normal, then probably the figures would have been about the same. Although, and here's another speculation of mine, because I don't know that, whether the present situation, the present what Donald Trump calls the enemy, has actually been in some fashion or other weaponized, and whether there is some actual combination here with 5G. There's an excellent chap somewhere in the United States, I think his first name is Dale. You'll have to dig to find out who he is.
Okay.
Who has been looking at this 5G situation and saying that the people who developed that, or had scientists develop it, actually developed it as a weapon. So if we're looking at whether it's dangerous or not, that's actually the wrong way to go about it. What he says is something like, if there's a landmine in my living room, and I say, look, maybe we should have somebody have a look at this and see if it's dangerous. It was engineered to be dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, it's a point of contention, and I just have to say, this platform is actually deleting videos that go into too much depth on that subject. So, but yes, it's a major point of contention. I want to do a far more in-depth show about it on a different platform where I don't have to worry about what we're saying. But we've got our first caller on the line, Group C. Group C, I want to say I like your new avatar, which you've changed it to there. How are you, buddy?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Excellent, excellent. You're on the air with Professor Ayran von Dreger. What's your question or comment?
So, are you familiar with the show Edge of Wonder?
Yes, the two chaps that run that, lovely people.
Yes, good guys.
Did you see their episode on symbolism?
Not that I can recall, dear. I've seen so many shows and watched so many that, no, I can't recall the specific one, but tell me about it.
So they had one that was really interesting. So we know that the cabal is one big thing with them is symbolism, right?
Yes.
Well, Ben and Rob brought up an interesting point. On an esoteric level, things that you put your mind to and empowers them. And so, they have us in some, a lot of us in enslavement, and they put before us symbols that we mind a lot. And one interesting one they brought up was, I guess it suggests, which is probably true, that this cabal goes back to the Roman Empire and way further back. And so Julius Caesar perhaps was a high-ranking member of the cabal. And so they said on their episode that when they crucified Jesus, they used the cross. And if you take the cross and you fold up all the sides, you get the cube. And the cube is a well-known, I guess, cabal symbol. If you know about this stuff. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, now I'm into speculation because I don't know the actual data on that. I mean, when one looks at the history of what we now call the cabal, or what become the globalists, one can certainly see that it goes way back to the Sumerian Empire. I mean, the fact that the Catholic Pope wears that mitred hat, that's the same hat that they had back in Sumerian times. So evidently the plan and the objective, the program that we're getting to the end of now, and I hope it's a major end of this system, does have those roots way back there, and therefore those families, those bloodlines, that program has been continuing in various ways. So if one looks at this meta history, which in a way is a site that I would refer you to, a very important site by an American called John Lash, Meta History. If you look at meta history all the way back, then you see that there is a progression, which is now coming to a particular head or to a tipping point. So Julius Caesar may very well have been one of the people in that. I mean, for that matter, people like Napoleon may very well have been King Arthur. Who knows? I don't know. I would have to speculate, looking back historically, about who the quote-unquote good guys were, as opposed to the big bad boys. And I don't know that. It's interesting to look at that. Certainly to be aware of the fact that the present situation in which we find ourselves is not simply the result of the last phase of capitalism in America.
No.
That are much longer.
Group C, this is something we've talked about on the show before, too. I mean, certainly I would imagine that at the very least, the modern version of what we know as the cabal extends back to the birth of the Rothschilds family and their spread throughout the world. But obviously it goes, much further than that. I mean, I've always considered what we're fighting against to be, not just a decades-old phenomenon, but, existing in various forms for centuries. I mean, they've been working on enslaving us completely for all of this time, and now finally that it's almost there, we're just starting to get the upper hand.
Right.
Yeah,
See, I think it's useful to go into the esoteric side a bit, and here I'm speculating. I don't have a direct handle on that. I mean, obviously some people do, who are intuitives or people who can operate directly at that level. My sense is that the spiritual level is a very important one to consider and to get more and more involved with in order to try to find out what's going on there. Because this also involves us then with the whole issue, the whole business of extraterrestrial intelligences. We are not the only intelligences in the universe. It reminds me a little bit of what happened at the time that the Holy Roman Catholic Church was faced with Galileo, who looked at the universe and said, look, the Earth is not the center of the universe, and everything else goes around the Earth. It's the other way around. In effect, the center of our particular solar system is the sun, and the Earth is going around that. That was a huge trauma for the population, a massive paradigm shift. Oh my God, we're not the center of the universe. And that was physically at that time. Okay, now we're going through a process of saying we are not the center of the universe, in the sense we are not the only quote unquote intelligent people, the people that have, we are consciously aware that we are aware. We are aware creatures. We have intelligence and therefore various degrees of free will within natural law. So this is a major paradigm shift once again, and probably a lot of the population may get as traumatized as the population of medieval Europe was at that time. I mean, it's a huge thing. Several of my friends on the net say, look, we've got to be very careful in terms of proceeding with this thing, not immediately, like with arrests and indictments and whatnot, because this is going to traumatize the population.
Yes, exactly.
The people that are your leader, the president of the United States, or the previous presidents, the justices of the High Court, the New York Times that fits all the news that's fit to print, our school teachers, our university professors. Yes, we were a little bit dubious, but mostly we are convinced that these people are telling us the truth. Now, to find out that these people are prevaricating, that they're telling us lies or half-truths, which are often worse than lies. You tell somebody a half-truth in order to sort of get them along. But in effect, the underneath agenda is to get them into further confusion. That's a huge thing for people to digest. Therefore, I'm entirely with not only friends of mine, but also Q, who says this is a chess game. And you have to proceed slowly and deliberately. And people who look, if you see two chess masters playing a world chess game, and you sit there, and one of the chess masters makes a move, and you say, what a stupid move that is, or he should make a different move. Can you tell 6 moves ahead about what the strategy is? You've got to be a chess master to be able to do that. So we have to have some degree of humility.
Absolutely.
So there's a combination. I was talking before about the importance of the masculine, to be in integrity, to stand as a genuine patriot, to be willing to fight, and if necessary, to be willing to die. We are in an information war now, which won't directly kill you, but there's an awful lot of suicides that are happening because people can't take what's going on right now. I mean, I'm over here in Cairns, Australia. One of the reasons I'm in Cairns, Australia, is that I've actually moved myself to sort of the edge of civilization over here. I mean, behind me is miles and miles of nothing. It hasn't been settled yet. So I completely understand the importance of going at this thing slowly and carefully, but also to look at the spiritual background, to get in touch with what our genuine spirituality is. And now I'm going to talk about an area which isn't my main area, but I certainly would encourage everybody here to get in touch with what your actual innate spirituality is. Use discernment as much as possible, because the religions as well, there's an awful lot of good that's been done by people in the religions, including the Christian religion or the Buddhist religion. But a lot of that is also orders that are coming from above, which make people used to the fact of obeying orders. Now, a lot of those orders may be very good orders, but the point is we've got to get to the point of where we're not willing to take orders anymore. And that means we're going to have to do some, as is usually said in these programs, do some of this research for ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I'll say now, from a political point of view, I'm going to say something else about that. We're back to the political side now. And that is, when people say, you have to do all this research for ourselves, That's an unreasonable demand.
It is.
What we need to do is to get to find out who people are, who we trust. And that is the restructuring of community.
Mm-hmm.
Where you trust your electrician. When he comes in and he does a job for you and electrically in the house, you hire somebody that you've got references to for, or that you know because they're going to do a good job. Same thing with a plumber, the same thing with an architect. Okay, we've got to now look at people that we can trust, like you, Zak, or the praying medic, Dave of the X22 report, Jordan Sadler, who am I looking at now?
Edge of Wonder. He just brought up Edge of Wonder. We got to give them a name drop. Those are good guys.
Exactly, but also people who used to be in the American military.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the chap that was a research director in the American military? Oh, I've forgotten his last name now.
General Flynn, Admiral Rogers.
No. These are current. This guy was a research director in an American military college, and he's got a Polish last name. And then he was either fired or dropped out of there. A senior military person, or Paul Craig Roberts,
mm-hmm.
a former Undersecretary of the Treasury. So there are people, older people, sort of my age group, who have retired or who've been kicked out, and we've got to find out who these people are, who we can trust.
Absolutely. Now, I really appreciate you saying that, and I don't want anybody to think that I consider myself to have a monopoly on information, and I am humbled at the idea that anybody would come here to trust what I have to say, and that's why I take it so seriously. And I always suggest, just because I am here with this platform, it doesn't mean that I'm infallible. The news, this information is coming so fast, and I want to get you guys as good of information as I possibly can. So I consider it a collaboration to be here with all of you.
Very good.
Group C, I appreciate the call, buddy. We're going to move on to the next one.
Thank you, and I'm glad you like my new picture.
Yeah, it's a good job. You did a good thing. All right, brother. God bless. We'll talk to you soon. All right, so I need to say thank you to Casey Anon. I was supposed to be a fill-in security guard at the Murrah building in Oklahoma City right before the incident. Dodged a bullet there. Gino says the FF in September of 2001 has always been the biggest deep state thorn in my side. Are you familiar with the Lawyers Committee for that incident in September, and also the Architects and Engineers for Truth? Maybe future guests, RP. I am familiar with Architects and Engineers, but not the Lawyers Committee. And yes, I would like to have them on, but what I want to do is have that on a different platform so that we can speak openly about it. Unfortunately, here they're not interested in it. Or the platform itself isn't. Patricia Furlong says a gathering in Colorado. Casey Anon, look up DARPA Information Awareness Office seal. Okay, let me just go ahead and copy that, and then we'll go ahead and do a search while we're continuing to talk. Baby Yoda says, Patricia, I'm game for a gathering just south of you. Hug waiting. And Patriot Drummer, if you're godly, suicide is not an option. It shouldn't be an option, but unfortunately, sometimes people can become so despondent that despite whatever punishment they think is going to be awaiting them, it's a better option than having to live in what we're living through right now. The world has gotten very dark for many, many people, and that's a big part of what I do. I want to try and lift people up and show them that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can be a part of that. We've got the next caller on the line, JJ Nebraska. We're just waiting for JJ's microphone to come on. Munch Muffer says, my goal as a digital warrior is to destroy the left-right paradigm. Yes, humanity will unite through love and positivity. That their spell will fail. And Baby Yoda says, if you're godly, absorb everything. Life is wonderful. Dig it. Yeah, the idea of the left-right paradigm, I believe, and I'm sure many people here believe, that's a construct just designed to further control us and enslave us. They tell you that there's only yes or no, there's left or right, there's black and white, and you've got to have one or the other. People will comment on things that I've said, and they say, if you don't believe what I'm telling you is my truth, then you must therefore be part of some controlled opposition, or the reason that you're doing what you're doing is nefarious because it doesn't exactly align with the way that I see the world. Well, I tell you, what I believe is what I believe, and I'm basing it on my own judgment, the things that I've learned, the things that I see, using my own discernment to make those informed opinions. And just because you have a different opinion about the way things are going doesn't mean that you're right. And we've got JJ Nebraska on the line, but I want to get your thoughts on everything we just said. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. The important thing is to learn to use one's discernment. And discernment is a capacity that each of us have. An awful lot of it has been dumbed down and has been covered over and has been masked. All sorts of things have been put into us by our conditioning, by our brainwashing, the propaganda that we've suffered. So one of the most important things is to learn how to get rid of those shields, of those masks that we wear, which we've been taught to wear, and get into our essential self. And on that, I completely agree with the Christians and the Buddhists and all the religious traditions that God is inside me, whatever one considers the creative source to be. I am an emanation. I am a creature in the best sense of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if I can get to examine myself inside, and then have not people who have a monopoly on anything, but quite the opposite. You have a genuine free market, including of discussion, which is what we're doing here. Mm-hmm. I'm not infallible. Zak isn't. The praying medic isn't. President Trump isn't infallible either, as he himself, I think, has said more than a couple of times. We're all human beings. Mm-hmm. But what makes us collaborate is the community in which we are in which we learn to trust one another and accept the fact that we can make mistakes at times. Mm-hmm. And we say things that allow us to correct one another. That's the journey that we're on.
Absolutely.
And if we do that in a joyful, in a celebratory way, have another glass of wine or a glass of water or a beer or whatever, and we discuss it. Mm-hmm. Part of the real terrible thing that has happened with political correctness is to stifle intelligent, reasonable discussion.
Absolutely.
And we have got to get back, or not just to get back, but to strengthen that as much as possible, so that we get together. This is the first time, actually, guys, that I've been in a Zoom meeting on my laptop. Zak just told me how to do that. I've been on my phone to do it previously. And I really appreciate being able to see the young man there who's been asking the question. What a great thing this internet is.
Yes, it is.
The internet is to the cabal what the Gutenberg printing press was to the Holy Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
The internet is to the cabal what Jamizdat was to the Russian Soviet Communist Empire. Mm-hmm. Jamizdat was the writing that people did, and they did that by handwriting and by writing things on typewriters, and they passed it along to one another because they knew that Pravda, the main newspaper in Moscow, the name Pravda in Russian means truth. They knew that wasn't the truth. The American population is now finding out that the New York Times and the Washington Post are not the truth. And this means that we are using right now is one of intelligent discussion, as intelligent as we can make it, mm-hmm. in order to feed off one another, to bounce off information, to bounce off ideas and so on, and therefore come as closely as possible to what is a reasonable course of action for us.
All right, we've got our next caller on the line, my friend Denise, and our UK correspondent. Denise, are you there?
I'm here.
Excellent. Wonderful to have you back on the show. What is your question or comment for Professor Ayran von Dreger?
Well, my comment is it's been fascinating listening to this young man, Professor Ayran, because as you know, I love history, but I also have a huge guilt trip going on every time people like this come on, because I always feel I should be apologizing to the USA for what England did to you, because all the cabal and all that deep state stuff came from here. It all started here.
Well, as Aaron also said, the Magna Carta did as well. So I think there's equal amounts good and bad that came from all over, and you certainly are not to blame for it, Denise. So don't worry about that. There's far more that you have to offer to the movement and to humanity than what your ancestors ever did to subjugate or enslave us.
Well, thank you for
You're
that.
very welcome. You're very welcome.
But it's been a fascinating show tonight for me. I've loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron. Well, actually, I just wanted to, I don't know if you can't see this, Aaron, but this is the seal of the Information Awareness Office for DARPA. It is the pyramid with the eye on top, and it is looking down at the Earth. So, I mean, it's essentially, total information awareness. They're looking, they're watching, and they see all. And it is, the world order, essentially. That they're telling us right there. Denise, have you seen this seal before? The DARPA Information Awareness Office seal?
No.
Oh, well, I'm putting it on the screen right now, and I know you're going to have a bit of a delay, but if you take a look, it will show up. And, it's one of those things that I can't believe I ever didn't know that this was in existence. It's right there in your face. Very, very interesting.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
The pyramid.
Yes, the
with
pyramid.
With the eye on the top. Oh, yes. My God.
And then it says something in Latin, scientia est potentia. I don't know, potential of science or something? I mean, I don't speak Latin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Knowledge is power.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting, very interesting. Well, Denise, thank you very much for calling in. Do you have any other comments for the professor on anything else that he's said tonight? Anything that you wanted to add your own thoughts on?
Not without taking up the rest of your show, Red Pill.
It's okay. It's okay.
Well, Denise, one of the things, not only for you, but for everyone else, is we have to learn to let go of any sort of guilt that we have, or any sort of resentment, or any sort of frustration. And letting go doesn't mean that we forget about it. It's that it doesn't push us anymore. We loosen the trauma that underlies that, because in order to act as capable individuals in our families, with our friends, and politically on the local or even world scene, we have to be able to do that like samurai, and that is to do it cleanly. In that regard, let me just refresh your mind on something that you probably already heard, and that is the samurai who was told by the emperor in China or Japan or wherever it was, go and cut off that man's head because he's a murderer and he's killed a couple of people in the village, and he's got to be removed. And so the samurai goes and just he raises his sword. What's one of the things called in Japan?
Samurai. I mean, I know. A seppuku is ritualistic sacrifice, ritualistic suicide.
Anyway, he raises we'll call it a sword in order to cut off the man's head. The man spits in his face, and the samurai shields his sword and goes away, because he cannot perform that action when he is in any kind of an agitated emotional state. So he goes away, and then he gets himself calm again. And the next day he comes back and he very cleanly cuts off the man's head, and that's the end of that. Now, that's not to justify that a man's head should be cut off, but it points out that what we need to do is we need to get to a situation inside ourselves where we feel calm, where we feel in integrity, where we feel at peace, because it's there that our intelligence, our discernment, our capacity to see the world clearly, that's where it comes from. If it's agitated in some way by guilt or by anger or by frustration or something, then we cannot act cleanly. Now, we can't do that 100% all the time, but that's something to aim for. And as Zak was saying, for heaven's sake, don't take on what your society has done to another society personally. That's a huge error. I've struggled. It took me quite a while to get over that myself, because I thought, oh my God, here we are. Austrians have done a heck of a lot of stuff. in Europe, not as badly as most other countries, but nevertheless, there's no point doing that or taking on that I am responsible in some way directly for the 16,000 children every day that get abducted or used for body parts or as sex slaves or whatever. No,
Right.
We have to get to the point of saying, okay, this is me, this is my internal creator-given intelligence and sensitivity and integrity, and act from there.
Looks like Scott Stanley decoded the Scientia est Potentia, knowledge is power. Okay, very interesting. And the sword is a katana. I should have known that one.
Oh, there's another name for the Japanese sword.
Okay.
Look, I just remembered now the name of that American who was a director of research in an American war college. You'll find him. His name is Alan Sabrowski.
Okay, all right.
Alan Sabrowski, I've been in touch with him personally as well. As a matter of fact, he's another person you could put on your list in terms of what's going on, with a very solid military background, obviously. And he could tell you something about what happened in the military. I'm very much going along with Professor Corsi, who, when asked about how Trump actually agreed to run for president, that there were two options at that point, that we'll call them the good guys, the patriots, thought we will have to have another American revolution, a revolution. This will be a civil war. We will have to use force inside the United States. Now, the only other alternative to that is to go legally. You have law, and where law obtains, where people agree to go with law, then you can do things in a civil kind of way, a reasonably civil kind of way. If that breaks down, underneath the law immediately is pure force. And so these people from the army, but not only from the army and the various parts of the army, but also from corporations, also people who are probably billionaires and people who are in the academic world. They've formed a network since the assassination of President Kennedy. That network has expanded and increased. It's always had to be underground, because otherwise the mainstream people will get rid of them. And they went to Donald John Trump and said, look, we have two choices. We can have a civil war in America, or we can try to do it legally. Would you be willing to run for president and to head this thing up? So he has to take responsibility for everything that happens because he's the president. But as I'm sure you know, there are thousands, probably tens of thousands of people who are working in his administration.
Absolutely.
For the good of the country, for the public good.
Yes, there is.
So he's the head of the whole thing. And what these people are doing, and these are all the patriots, and all the people listening to this program who agree with what we are saying, and who agree on the danger, and who agree on the necessity to bring these people down in whatever way that can be done. We are all the patriots. We are the digital soldiers, and we are called on to have the courage to stand with the other patriots in community, in discussion, and do that. And I completely agree that suicide is the coward's way out.
Mm-hmm.
I can sympathize with people who get so desperate and who get so frustrated that in effect, in a moment of frustration, they throw themselves off a bridge or something. And it's ultimately, I suppose, well, I'm not judging.
I'm right there with you. I mean, things have to be pretty bad for you to feel that that's the only option that you have. Listen, Denise, I want to thank you for your call, and we're going to bring the next person in.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good night. And just to let you know, Aaron, we found some disturbing information about Dr. Corsi. I know that he used to be a big part of the Patriot movement, and unfortunately, he tried to besmirch the Q operation and tried to take it over at one point. So, unfortunately, it's a sad thing, but he hasn't been around as a result of that. I need to say thank you to Sam. Says, ask Professor Aaron, do you have any idea what George Soros would do in the next 2 years to derail Trump? He recently donated $1 billion to the Open Society University for this project. Why does the U.S. protect George? Any thoughts on that?
Look, first of all, we know more and more of what dear Mr. Soros has been doing, and it's not just Mr. Soros, but his various allies and compatriots. So this is never a one particular person.
Mm-hmm.
It is always a whole group of people, some of whom are mercenaries, some of whom are paid, and some of whom are threatened. They cooperate because their families, their kids are threatened. I mean, you know, the chap, for instance, who was a pilot for some of the drug running, and then he was found at home.
Barry Seal. Barry Seal?
Was it Barry? No,
Well,
I think it was another chap.
Well, I'm sure there's more than one.
Okay, who purportedly shot his 2 kids.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I remember that. Yeah, and the
his
dog too.
And then himself. Okay, so in effect, some of the people with George Soros may be there under severe threat.
Duress.
Just imagine yourself. You start working for somebody. You don't know what sort of an ogre this person is, and you rise up in the organization. Then you find out what sort of shit is going on. You can't get out of it.
Right, right. Well, it makes me think of Ronald Bernard. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He was the banker that came forward. They wanted him to do some horrific things with kids. He knew that he was involved with bad people, but then he found out just how bad it was, and that's when he got out.
Look, if you're one of the Rothschilds, was found dead, presumably of suicide by hanging himself or something with his tie in his bathroom. Now, before that happens, if you're in any way associated with this cabal, they say, look, if you're sufficient psychopath, then you can work with us, and then they'll take you to the Bohemian Grove. We'll put you through. I'm sure you know the name of the main ceremony.
Yes,
What's the name of the main
cremation
ceremony?
of care.
The cremation of care. So they put you through that. So there's a select group that are actually absolutely reliable. It's like in the Mossad. It's like in the Israeli Mossad. They take 10 people out of 10,000 that originally apply, and then those people are completely indoctrinated. They're a form of super soldier.
Absolutely.
Who knows what kind of MK Ultra has been done on them in order to make absolutely sure. What is George Soros and that group of people going to do? One can only guess. I have no idea. I mean, look at what they've done in the past. To fund all these caravans coming up the United States. You can name them better than I can.
Absolutely.
We know what the guy is after. And once again, he is only, he is the particular figurehead whose name we know of the bad boys of the cabal.
Yes, he's probably the public face of something much worse, I would think. Well, listen.
Okay.
We've got our next caller on the line. So I just want caller. Can I get your name? Caller, let me unmute you. Sorry, caller, are you there? Caller. Every time that I try to unmute you, it goes back to mute. So Gramanon says, been practicing drawing leaves in my spare time. Professor Aaron's shirt really helps. That's great. Good stuff. Brian, welcome to the show, Brian. What's your question or comment?
I just have 2 quick questions. The first is, Professor, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Ayran von Dreger?
No, it's Aaron. Aaron. Just Aaron? The same way. Aaron, yes.
Ayran von Dreger.
Yes, and it's actually von Dreger. In the German language, the consonant V is pronounced like F. So we say like Volkswagen.
Yes, like Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, my last name is Foltz, Foltz. So
okay.
I think it used to be VOL. But anyways, my quick question is there anything that you could help me understand more about the protocols of Zion? I've studied it, and there are like 2 different roads you can go down. One says that it's completely a joke, and the other says that it's absolutely correct.
Any idea as to the legitimacy of those protocols?
No one that I know of knows exactly what the origin of that is, who put it out, who published it, and therefore what their particular aims may be. So all we can do at this point is to look at what is written in those protocols and then compare it with what has actually happened. And if one does that, then no matter who published it or no matter what their particular aims is, there is a tremendous congruence between what is found in those particular statements and what has actually been happening. Now, in relation to that, let me point out one very, very important thing, and that is to differentiate very clearly between people who identify themselves as Jewish, Jewish by religion, Jewish by spiritual faith, whether they're Orthodox Jewish or whether they're ordinary Jewish people that go to the synagogue because that is their religion, that is their belief system, to make a really important and drastic distinction between those and the Zionists. The Zionists. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing where people tend to get hung up because they hear about something like that, the protocols, and they immediately put it on, all people of that faith. And it's the same type of thing with every religion. You're going to have corruption. You're going to have people working for their own ends. You're going to have people working, for the cabal. And I think that they hide within the moniker of whatever that religion is that they are just happening to stand behind at that time.
Exactly. I mean, as you well know, the one thing that one cannot say in any of the Western world is to say anything which is considered to be anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. And anti-Semitic is that protection that you just referred to, where they use that so that when the Zionists, and the Zionists for me are key members of the Cabal. As a matter of fact, they may be some of the top people in the Cabal. So back to the protocols of the elders of Zion, those certainly seem to point out a program which has been more and more put into effect. And that is everything from taking over much of the Middle East in the Israeli state to being globalists that in effect want to be the people that actually control the whole world, that diminish the population to whatever the Georgia Guidestones say, down to 500 million people is all these people need to be the servants of this elite that is actually going to dominate and run and enjoy what the planet has to offer. So that's about all I can say. I cannot verify. I don't know anyone who can about what the actual origin is, but that's not so important. What's important is to read some of this stuff, no matter who wrote it, and to use that intelligently in the way of looking at what further does it say which hasn't yet happened. So back to the question of what Mr. Soros may do, maybe by reading some of these things, we can actually gain some clues. Absolutely. And not attribute it to anyone in particular. And back to Jerome Corsi, I agree. I mean, something's happened to him. But if I put myself into his position, supposing that I I could be Jerome Corsi. I mean, I was a professor of political science. Mm-hmm. Now, supposing they said, look, then we're not only going to kill your dog, we're not only going to kill your cat, we're going to kill your kids. Sure. I mean, look what they did to General Flynn. Mm-hmm. General Flynn. Represented by this, legal outfit, which in effect is part of the Cabal, right? Or at least they're associated with it. Like, they got him to plead guilty. Why? Because they threatened him. They blackmailed him because of whatever was happening with his son and his son's family and his new child that was either then born or was going to be born. So when one looks at any of these people, if I put myself in that position, then I can say, look, what they may do at certain points is not what I thought. But then what sort of threat, what sort of blackmail, what sort of danger are they actually under? So we have to take the good parts or the ones that are, useful. And go with those.
I've actually considered that before. Like, did they force Dr. Corsi and coerce him into sacrificing himself to try to destroy the movement? Brian, do you have another question? Because if not, we're going to move on to the next caller.
Oh no, sir. Go ahead and move on. But first, I would just like to say, I didn't mean anything anti-Semitic about any of this. I was just asking a question.
No, don't worry. That was clear, and I appreciate you clarifying. So thank you very much, Brian.
Totally clear. Thank you, Brian.
All right. Have a wonderful evening. All right.
Both of you.
Yes, you do the same. I just need to say thank you to Jean. Jean, I'm not going to say your last name because I'm sure you don't want to get doxxed. She says, been listening to you since the beginning, even bought the book that I was in. Can't make monthly, but you know you've made a difference. Will you live stream the wedding? LOL JK. So happy you're doing a good one. Thank you very much, Gene. I appreciate you for all your help. And even if you were just here watching the show and liking it and sharing it, that would be wonderful. Thomas, thank you for that. Patricia Eggleston, thank you for that. Linda Graham, she says best wishes to Chi-Chi. Lynn, thank you for that. Dana says, oh, that was for Warhawks discount. Okay, it's no problem. It's okay. You guys, I see people, somebody actually sent a donation on PayPal the other day, and they said that it was for a good or a service. I just want to be very clear. The show is free. If anybody sends a donation, it's a donation. I don't want you to think that there's any exchange there, because the show will always be free. And if you do it as friends and family on PayPal, then nobody has to worry about paying a fee. TechnoAxe, longtime friend of the program, is coming up. Want to say thank you to Karen Ream as well. And then thanks again, Graham, for the thought about the leaves. Hey, what's up, TechnoAxe? How you doing, buddy? Still muted. No microphone yet. Bottom left. Go to the bottom left and choose your microphone. This is what we went through before the show. It happens every time. Don't worry about it. Always happens. Oh, there you are, TechnoAxe. You're on.
Yes. All right. Cool. That is yeah. There's a bunch of things that are like floating around in my mind to ask Ayran Dreger here. One of the things that comes to mind is that there's a whole bunch of speculation about like the different families and stuff like that, and even like the Pacers and stuff like that. And I'm going through like the Bush family in my mind. Do we know anything about like how they kind of all fit together in terms of them being like a cohesive effort? Because I feel like the Pacers might be kind of like an amalgamation of these different families, instead of just like the Pacers, a point thing. So
I don't know anything directly about it. I've heard a lot and read a lot about the connection between these various families, including the Clintons and the Bushes, and going back into history. But I don't have any direct information on that. No.
Okay.
This is something I've always wanted to get more information about. I mean, clearly the Pacers are an actual family. I have a friend who was actually trolled by a member of the Pacer family, and I don't know if he was trolling just because, he thought it was funny, or if he's actually part of some, awful plan going on. If they are actually the puppet master behind the puppets. But I wish that somebody would come forward with some firsthand information. Continue, though, TechnoAxe.
Okay, my second random thought of the night, because I'm just completely out there right now, is I remember during the beginning of this whole lockdown thing, I'm running across a video from like a Chinese national, and she was like literally apologizing for her race because they gave us the coronavirus. And I feel like I immediately thought this. I was like, I don't blame you, and this is not exactly not really a race thing at all. This is like the CCP, and I hope they realize that we differentiate. Even like back in 2014, when the whole Ukraine thing went away, and they tried to restart the Cold War. I feel like everybody thought, well, this is kind of ridiculous. Why are you're trying to restart the Cold War, but nobody's buying it because we can see people on the other side and they're just like us, It's insane what they were trying to do at that point.
Ayran, any thoughts?
No, look, I totally agree. One of the things that I find really wonderful and useful is that here in Cairns, there is a big esplanade. We're on the beach front. There's a lovely lagoon. There's a lot of people that come here. Well, they used to come here. They will come here again. At the moment, everything is in lockdown. And they come from different countries. And so I've talked to travelers who are from China and from Japan, as well as from European countries and so on. And it's wonderful how I can see that all of these people understand that they are very much like, in terms of human beings, like the other people in the other countries, in the other races, from the other ethnic groups, and that people of your generation is going to be the generation that's going to form the intelligent, the humane village, global village here, because you understand that in effect what's happened is that the powers that be, the big bad boys, have been doing everything possible to divide you, have been doing everything possible to, like that lady from England, for instance, to make you feel either guilty or aggressive because that other country has done this to you. There is no such thing as a country. There's only individual people who collectively then form a particular group or country. So I would absolutely encourage you, I'm sure what you're already doing, TechnoAxe, and that is to befriend people in all sorts of parts of the world. You can now do that with the internet. Good for you guys. You are the new generation that is going to create a different world here. Very much do the networking, get in touch with one another, share information. You can share information about the cabal or the political scene, but share information about the kind of drinks that you like, the kind of relationships that you have with your friends. And like David Icke says, he calls it love. Some people say unconditionally love people. For me, that's much too highfalutin. Like David Wilcox says, just be nice. Be nice to your family, your friends, your relationships, and also the people in the grocery store and in the community. That's the new world. When people learn actually that they're all human beings, that they have been treated as slaves, that they have been propagandized, that all sorts of shit has been dumped on them, but make those connections wherever you live, in your community, in your neighborhood, in your city, in your village. Find out as much as possible where your food is coming from. Make some arrangements, if possible, with local farmers so that you get more food locally, as all sorts of people here have been talking about the supply chains. The supply chains which have been coming from across the world, which use an incredible amount of energy and then put whole groups of people in danger if those supply chains are broken. Go local. In that way, I completely agree with what the traditional intelligent left was. The left has been corrupted tremendously. The left used to stand for a greater equality, a greater opportunity for people, a greater ability to actually make contact with people in the local area. So find out more.
Isn't it funny how the roles have kind of changed? I mean, the conservatism is truly like counterculture now, and the left is more just like traditional fascism. It's insane.
Well, I have
right.
I have one more question then. Do you consider Trump to be an actual, for lack of a better word, Republican or actual Democrat, or is he? I think the term populist was was brought around, and I think that may be the more accurate term here.
I would say so. I mean, he has to identify as either a Democrat or Republican because, unfortunately, we have this two-party system in the United States. If he wasn't officially a Republican, he wouldn't be able to get on the ballot. And if he wasn't a Republican, he'd have to identify as a Democrat. And I think we've seen throughout the years, anytime he dabbled with politics, he was, either one or the other, and he's been both. So, Aaron?
I would go along with what Robert David Steele says on that and his unrig, and that is that the whole electoral system in the United States has been changed. Germany, New Zealand have proportional representation, and that is you have a system in which there are any number of parties, and you vote for a representative from those parties, and they get together. And then there is what ought to be the case in Congress and in Parliament, an intelligent discussion among the people who have been put there to genuinely represent the population. As far as Donald Trump is concerned, what I'm listening to is simply what the man says and how he looks when, what his expressions are. And it seems to me really clear that this guy who came up and he was in the real estate and development and God knows what sort of industry, and made his money that way. And he worked within the system to make his money that way. So people said, yes, but you went bankrupt. Well, that's part of the American system. The average American lawyer, I am told, goes bankrupt at least 5 or 6 times because they use that. That's the way the system is the problem, okay? Now, Donald Trump himself, I see him as rising to be to the stature of a statesman. Like I see Putin. I mean, these guys are not necessarily the friendliest, the easiest people to get along with. They've got huge egos. Oh my God, they've got their megalomaniac streak, as we all do, except they probably have more. But they use that for the benefit of the community. People who have been saying to me, look at, Donald Trump, they don't like him for this reason or for that. And I say, look, if you were in that position and you are facing the cabal, you're facing the deep state. And the deep state, as you guys know more and more, is very deeply entrenched in the United States. In the universities, the universities are treasonous to their society. There's a Frenchman who wrote a book called La Trahison des Clercs, the treason of the intellectuals. The corporate people who are into short selling and nude short selling or whatever they've been doing, these are treasonous to their society. The deep state is full of snakes and alligators and crocodiles, a lot more than I have here around Cairns. I have a few, but you guys have a lot more. So,
Aaron, we're actually at the top of the hour, and we got to sign off because another show is going to be starting, RDoc, over on his channel. So, listen, I appreciate you coming here. Thank you for everything you've said tonight. I look forward to having you back in the future. I know that the audience really, really enjoyed speaking with you. Just before we go, tell everybody how they can find you. We've got your Facebook profile in the description of the video. You want to hand out your email as well?
No, I'll stick with the they can get a hold of me through that. I would very much appreciate people here in Australia to get a hold of me. I would really like that. Yes, by all means, look at my Facebook pages. And I'm still on Facebook. I don't know how long I'm going to be there. Okay. But by all means, do that and support the president, support your patriots, support your country, be genuine patriots in the best sense. I salute you all. My respect to you all. Stand in your integrity and in your truth. Way to go, America. You are leaders in the world. Take that position, and we will be grateful to you.
Absolutely. Well, Aaron, thanks again for joining us. I appreciate it. Technoax, thanks for being here at the final end. Thank you to everybody for hanging out and having a great show with us. Please, if you have not liked it yet, consider liking it and then sharing it on your way out the door. And make sure you're still subscribed and that you've hit all notifications. Love you guys. Good luck, and God bless.